You're listening to the Call Kent podcast, where Kent C. Dodds answers questions and gives insights to software engineers like you. Now, let's hear the call.
Can I use the md5 checksum of the JSON data as key for each row in React? So context here is that I have a bunch of rows to show. The data for the rows does not have an ID, and I can't use index of the data because the order of the rows may change. So what I'm doing is I'm using the md5 of the JSON.stringify of the rows data. But I'm thinking that calculating this md5 or the SHA-1 in the UI render cycle may not be the right thing because it's compute intensive. So maybe I shouldn't be in the render cycle, as the render may get fired over and over as things on the top are changing. So how do you suggest I do this? Thank you.
And that was the call. Here's what Kent had to say.
Hey, Sandeep, thank you so much for the question. So yes, your intuition is correct that this would be expensive and probably not the best thing to do in the render cycle. The fact that your data doesn't have IDs is problematic. It would be great if you could make it have IDs. But if you can't, then creating an ID or generating it based on a checksum, I think is reasonable. Keep in mind that the checksum is going to be the same if the data is the same. So if you could ever possibly have two rows that have the exact same data, well, then now you're going to be in trouble. So that may be a problem. So what I would suggest is when that data is loaded, before handing it off to React, you would add an ID to it. So wherever you're doing the fetch request to go get it, or wherever it's coming from, just append an ID to each one. And it would probably be okay to just make the ID be the index of each one of those. So as long as that, as you're doing this just when the data is loaded, then if the client changes the order of the array, that ID would stay the same. And so using the index as the ID would be fine. Now, I don't know everything about your situation. Like maybe you're loading more data later or something like that and combining it. And so using the index wouldn't work very well. But that's just a thought that might be helpful. But anyway, the real solution here is to add an ID to the data, and maybe that ID is a checksum, but I would add that checksum before handing it off to React. Now, if for some reason that is not an easy solution, or there's a problem with that, then you can do md5 checksum in the render cycle, but I would memoize that using useMemo. That still is not great because you're going to have the initial hit to generate all those IDs, but at least you won't get hit every single render. If I were to review my suggestions, first try to give the data an ID. If you can't do that, then assign an ID, generate an ID where you're loading the data. And if that's not going to work for you, then make sure you're at least memoizing the generation of the data of the ID using useMemo. So I hope that helps, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
This has been the Call Kent podcast. Learn more about Kent at kentcdodds.com and get your own questions answered at kentcdodds.com/calls.